Thank you very much for joining us, Jose. It's a pleasure for me to have you in this short interview. The purpose of this interview is to get to know more about you, more about your practices, more about what you think about the remote work, tendencies that have been happening, and to dig a little bit deep in terms of that, so that folks that are able to either listen to this or see the the recording or see the blog that we're going to produce are able to get some tactical information and use that to improve on their team's experiences, as well as build on new teams. So with further ado, I'll give you some time for you to introduce yourself. I don't know if you want to state your name, what is it that you do, a little bit about your role and your experience as a manager.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having me here, Jesus. My name is Jose Delgado, and I am a software engineering manager for a company called Olo. I have been doing software engineering since late 2002, early 2003, and I have been managing teams of software engineers for about the past 10 years, with a little break about a year and a half ago. And I am out of San Antonio, Texas, by the way.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but I used to live in Austin, Texas for 10 years. So we share that the Texas spirit, which I know is pretty good in terms of the whole engineering, and it's been growing quite a lot in terms of companies moving out there as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, especially Austin and Dallas area. There's a lot of headquarters now from large corporations, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and the like. They're all moving over here to Texas. Tesla being the latest one.
Oh yeah, with HQ2.
Made the news. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. And what does can you tell me a little bit about Olo, and how big a team you currently manage? What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So at Olo, I manage what we call the menu team. So Olo is in the restaurant space.
Mm-hmm.
Olo enables restaurants to have an online presence and be able to do delivery with all the major delivery partners. So think Uber Eats, DoorDash, and the like. And when you think about menus, imagine you're a restaurant brand and you sign up with Olo, and you want your menus to show up in our white label site, and you want your menus to show up in DoorDash, and you want them to show up on Google and all these different places. So what we do is we expose multiple ways for you to do that, right? So there's an administration panel, there are APIs, and that basically takes care of the consumption of the menus, and then we then syndicate those menus out to the different consumers. So that is at the core, what my team does at Olo. We currently have 8 engineers, senior for the most part, and staff level engineers, but we will be onboarding about 3 new engineers pretty soon, fingers crossed.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And do you grow constantly on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis? Is it more organic growth, or do you have a set standard for the whole year? How do you deal with growth in terms of engineering?
As a company, we have been pretty much doubling for the past 3 years, I would say. We doubled the engineering team for the most part. We have planned to hire, I believe it's close to 90 engineers this round. DevOps, management, software engineers as well. Software engineers at all levels, all the way from junior to staff. So yeah, lots of growth. With COVID specifically, Olo went from being what you would consider a nice to have to a must have, right? When all restaurants are forced to close and only do delivery, then, we become a very, very necessary company for them. And, that showed in all the extra orders that came through our system. So that's where we're
that
at.
Sounds like happy problems, and those are the problems
yes.
that you want to have. So I'm happy for y'all that this is that's a silver lining, I guess, in terms of all this that's happening worldwide, and being able to provide that, because that's, in a way, it's becoming the norm for everyone to include these apps in their everyday life. So it's pretty cool that you get to have a little bit of input in terms of what's happening behind the curtain. So that's pretty cool work.
Yes,
And uh
and we managed to keep a lot of people employed, which makes us very happy, right? Because there's a difference now, right? So just because they're able to do delivery, you can at least keep some people employed on those restaurants instead of fully closing the locations. So it's you know it's good for economy, good for everybody that needs to find some food. Now they're able to get it delivered to their homes as well, or go pick it up. Which just being enablers in that whole area, I think is a pretty rewarding experience for us. So we're very happy that we're doing it.
That's awesome. At least I know that I use at least Uber Eats, or I used to use Favor a lot, but Uber Eats I use at least like once or twice a week, at least. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm one of those users.
We work with Faber as well. Texas based, HEB bought
Yeah.
them, but yes.
So yeah, that's pretty cool. And is this the biggest team you've ever managed in terms of engineering?
And no, I've had teams. I think the largest was about 16 engineers,
Wow.
but that is not really sustainable. It's a lot of work, right? So what we decided to do back then was basically split the team into smaller
Okay.
teams, right?
Okay, that's interesting, and I think I'll want to come back into this a little bit as we dive into other questions. But this is very interesting because I always wanted to know if there was a ceiling on it, but I'll keep it in the backlog for now.
Sounds good.
And one of the questions that I love asking is the reasons behind doing something. So what made you get into engineering? Was there a particular reason?
Engineering per se, I like to tell the story is it was a radio ad and good luck. The radio ad, I was driving and there was this radio ad that basically said networking administration is the future. That's what the radio ad was for. And you should join and study network administration at the local community college because you're going to make a lot of money and everybody's going to be doing this. And I was still in high school at the time, and I listened to that and I was thinking, that sort of makes sense. I really don't know what I want to do, so um, I'll just go and try it. So I signed up in the community college, and I actually got an associate's in networking administration, information technology. I hated every minute of it. I'll be honest, but it got me thinking about technology. And so at the time, I also had a job at a consulting company, and at the consulting company, they decided to give me the opportunity to join their QA team. So I started doing manual testing in QA, and then from QA, I jumped over to the engineering team, and they just said, would you like to learn how to code? And I said, yes. They gave me a pile of books, and that's how I got started. So,
Go learn, basically.
yeah.
Hey, that's pretty cool. And this is very interesting to know. With CodersLink, we deal with over 13,000 developers in our community, and we've had these questions before. In terms of what's the right path towards getting to engineering, and what we say and what you're telling me is sort of like the same thing. Is there's no ideal path. I mean, you can either go like straight to engineering from from college, or go through different areas such as like yours, a network, and then QA, and then engineering. So I think discovering a little bit of all the different areas of engineering helped modern day developers really know exactly what they want, because there's just a lot of different areas that exist within engineering that it's hard for them to understand or grasp when they're making those big decisions. And those big decisions are when we were young, when we were like 18, we don't even know about life, and you're making
Exactly.
huge decisions. So it's pretty cool that you were able to to bump around in terms of the technology industry before landing into what you do today. And from what I gather in our previous conversations, that you really love doing.
Yes. Yes. It became a passion that I didn't know I had. Right. So that's the lucky part in my history, that this company was willing to have me learn on the job. So that was a really good experience for me, and I discovered the world of software engineering that way. So
Pretty cool. Okay, so let's switch gears and move a little bit into one of the top topics of right now, which is remote work. As you know,
okay,
remote work is basically permeating our everyday lives. It's become the new normality, and But the thing is, remote work was popular in tech way before COVID-19 and before the pandemic struck. So I know that you've been working remote for past couple of years, but how long? I don't know exactly how long. So how long have you been working fully remote?
It's been about 7, close to 8 years now that I've been fully remote.
Wow, that's a lot of time. And how do you think? What do you think that we as an industry, technology as an industry, and every other industry nowadays has. Why do you think we evolved into that? Why do you think we evolved into remote work? Do you think there's a particular reason for that, or you think it's just
Uh,
natural? What do you think about that?
I think it's a combination of things, right? So we have better internet speeds, right? And that's a big enabler. We have much better security at the edge. So think of your laptops, your cell phones, better apps for communication as well. So Zoom and your chat, Slack, Teams, they're all enablers for these things, right? And then, so when you have the combination of good internet, good security, and good applications, then it just becomes very natural. It's just like waiting, for this explosion of people to find out that you can work in this, different way than what you're used to, and that it works, right? And I think another one, and this is coming from more thinking of large corporations, back in the day, you felt like you had to maintain everything in-house, right? So you had your servers in-house, you had your own data centers, laptops had to be there, you had a little chain, for your desktop or laptop computer, and it was secure, and you're securing everything in your building. And then you have the cloud coming in, and now you have a lot of software as a service companies, right? So everything is in the cloud somewhere, and you just sign up, right? And you get an account. So then that shift from we have to keep everything in house to, somebody else is going to take care of that. Everybody that works in an office, with their data, right, wherever they are. All I have to do is implement these new security measures, have VPN set up, right? And so this the combination of all these things being available, I think made remote work very obvious to, the ones in technology. And now, obviously, with COVID, it's like, there's really no other way to work. So if you want to survive as a company and you don't have to be present, then don't be present, right? Work remotely, and that is just the way forward, I think.
And that's, I think you struck on some very interesting points. Because while you were saying that, I kept thinking about the time that I would have to plug into the computer and then dial up, and then it was a whole sound, beep, 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 beep. It was
Yep.
really hard, to get online. And now that you're saying that, it makes perfect sense. I mean, how would you be able to work like that before? Of course, it would be, insane. But nowadays, you don't even think about it. You open your laptop, you're online. You don't even have to click anything. You're online.
Exactly.
So that's a very interesting point, and I think it's only going to get, in my point of view, it's only going to get bigger and better and more immersive. I don't know if with AI or not AI, but augmented reality is what I wanted to go. Will even give us another depth, because I think this is sort of like the first layer. But I think we'll have to wait a couple of years
Yeah.
for that. But I think it's interesting to think about, right? And I mean, you also say that there's it's been a natural evolution in terms of how the technology has been coming together. On the flip side, what do you think the advantages are for of remote work, or of working remotely?
The biggest differentiator in my mind is that we don't reward presence anymore, right? So think about it this way, you used to reward the person that showed up early at the office, the one that attended the most meetings, the one that stayed late, right? The one that had a presence in the workplace. Those were usually the high achievers. They wanted to be close to their bosses, to executives, and that's how you would move up, right? With remote, well, there's the concept of presence. You can have a one-on-one meeting via Zoom, or you have, a status in your Slack. The what the added value here is that you look more at what comes out from your work, right? What value are you adding to the company, and not, how much presence time, do you have in an office. So, that mind shift, change in mindset, I believe is probably one of the biggest advantages of working remotely.
I agree. That meritocracy, if you will, it's sort of like the shining a light on it. And I think that's very important in a company, and very important in terms of understanding who's really doing the work, not who's really showing up, which I think that's your point, right? So
Exactly, yes.
I 100% agree on that. And it's interesting to see how that'll continue to play out and get immersed in the DNA of new companies, because I think we're still in the younger ages, younger years. I think that's a better way of saying it. Younger years of remote work. So it'll be awesome to see how companies evolve into that. For example, CodersLink, we were fully remote from inception. So we've never known. I think the only time we've seen the whole team are yearly retreats. But besides that, that's the only time we're in the same building. So hopefully
Exactly.
we'll see in 5, 10, 15 years that what the actual outcome of that is. But before between now and then, there are a lot of things can happen. And
Yes.
technology is a very interesting world, and like we were saying, there's just a lot of different roles, a lot of different categories, a lot of different programming languages. And thinking about remote work, do you think there are several positions that are better suited for remote work than others, or do you think it's just playing across the board? What do you think about that?
Um, on the technology side, unless you're actually maintaining hardware on a data center, I think it's very difficult for anyone to then make a case that you cannot be remote, right? All the tools are there, the software is there. All you basically need is a computer, an internet connection, and that's it. You can do your job, right? So there's really no excuse unless you have to be physically present to do something. Maybe an accountant might need to do, some paper shuffling of some sort, but pretty much all, all accounting software, it doesn't require a physical signature, right? So there are digital signatures to be used for that. So there's really no excuse. I think it's more of a preference that and maybe a mindset is still embedded in some people, where they just prefer to have a presence and have somebody next to them and have those conversations and the face to face, and that's totally fine, right? As long as you admit that that is the reason why you're not allowing remote, right?
Yeah, being upfront about it. I want to see you in the office.
Yes,
That's it. Just say it.
exactly.
But that's
Yes.
pretty cool. I mean, it's cool to hear, that at least in the technology industry, at least in technology roles, most of them can do it. So, I mean, I don't know why I kept thinking about sort of like those hardware rooms where there's just a million servers. Like that guy would not be able to work remotely, but I think that's the only one.
Yeah.
So that's pretty awesome. And I want to dive deep in terms of zeroing in. We talked about remote work. I want to talk a little bit more in depth. Going on one magnifying it a little bit closer about engineering. I'm sorry, about general management practices. I know you are currently a manager, and from what I gather, for what I've talked about, from my own experience, I know management is definitely not easy, and it's a different way of doing a specific job and managing a team. It's just different in so many ways. And I know there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And I know there's a lot of different practices, frameworks, and a variety of things out there.
Mhm.
And, I'm interested in learning, in your eyes, what's the role of a manager?
Role of a manager. It's actually a good question. I think that has changed. I have to say that. So we're in this sort of transition stage, especially in software engineering. So, and even in the Air Force, I don't know if I mentioned here that I was in the Air Force, right? When they teach about management, and a lot of the books out there, when they teach about management, it's reward and punishment. So carrots and sticks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reward people for good work and then punish them when they do bad. And that is very common across the industries, lots of industries, and it's a very common way to manage individuals, right? But when you manage software engineers, right, you're dealing with creatives, right? And then you find that the carrots and sticks approach doesn't really work that well, right? So then the switch is into what the industry calls servant leadership, right? You become an enabler for the team. You get your team unstuck, you remove roadblocks, you coach them, you give them the resources that they need, and then you get out of the way, right? You want to have,
Yeah.
you want your team to have autonomy, right? Mastery and purpose, right? So that's very important thing. Um, so it's a change in the way you think about what it means to manage a team. You don't have to be there telling people what to do, exactly how to do it, when to do it. That's no longer the job of a manager, right? So the job of manager is to get the team together, help with processes, get everybody on stock, and then allow them to be a masters of their domain, right? You hire them because they're experts, let them be experts.
I like that. I like that, and I think that's spot on, and specifically for creatives like you were talking about it allows them to continue to build autonomously, and I think that's one of the most key things for growth and why companies should look at that approach, that particular approach for their teams. Now, do you have any specific principles? I know you mentioned a couple of them, but I don't know if you follow a specific list of principles or any. Also, you mentioned an approach, but any different approach or different name to the approach that you manage?
So yes, there are things you gather throughout the years and from experience, and then trial and error. I want to apologize to my early teams. I probably put you through the paces, and I was doing a lot of learning on the job as I went and reading things. But so the things that I care about, for example, care about team accountability, right? So it's a team effort from the start, right? So production code doesn't get to production without multiple people being involved. So then team accountability is probably the first thing for me. Time management is a big one for me as well. If we're staying late, we're probably doing something wrong. Even during, crush time or pressure time, that, we should be able, 8 hours in a day is more than enough for us to do our work. So time management. Constraints, it's another one, and this mostly, I came from a poor background. You basically, if you want to play soccer and you didn't have a soccer ball, you made one out of paper, right? So you look for the value and then you look for what you have and then you try to provide that value. And I think this is extremely valuable in business, right? So uh, that carried over from just my background. Simplicity first is one of those things where, something simple, it's a lot easier to explain, a lot easier to understand, a lot easier to replicate, but it's not easy to achieve. So simplicity is not an easy thing, but it's something that I strive for with my teams, with my processes, when we're architecting systems, keep things as simple as possible, even though it's going to be something very hard to do. And I value the individual. So I know that I hold my teams accountable, but on the individual level, I need to learn how to communicate with you specifically, what you like, what you dislike, right? So it's very important to have that one-on-one relationship, to be able to be a better coach to them, to be able to have them grow with you as a team. You need to know the individual, and then again with this team-based approach, trust. So lots and lots of exercises to gain trust and be able to have conversations, even when the conversations might be, have negative connotations, where there's a difficult subject. We should be okay raising our hands and saying there's a problem, right? So if you don't have that trust, it becomes very difficult. Things start, your team start hiding things from you, and that's when you get into problems, right? So that's sort of like more or less, my quick framework. I don't know what to call it, but based on that, it expands into everything else
That's
that I
pretty
do.
awesome, and I like them. I like them all. I mean, a couple of ones that that I noticed quite a lot is the simplicity one. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I know that it's usually solutions, the best solutions are simple, but the implementation of those simple solutions is completely, insane and massively difficult. So I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate that. Sometimes our mind wants to go into the complex, complex stuff, and the more complex about, the smarter we might feel. But it's sometimes it's definitely just not the way. So I really appreciate that, and I definitely like that. I like that one a lot. And I think that another key thing that you mentioned, and I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in terms of that, is trust, because I recognize that trust is built on, it's somewhat, it's earned as well. There's various degrees of trust. Trust is not the same with everyone. You may trust another person more than you do another one. So I think trust is key, not only for teams, not only for management, but for achieving goals that are unified. And so you mentioned that there's, I don't know, I don't remember specifically the wording that you used, but you mentioned that there's some decisions that lead to trust. So, or there's some activities that lead to trust. So in terms of digging a little bit into that, what can you tell us about how you build trust with your own team?
Sure. It's not easy. It's going to take a long time, I'll be honest. But one of the things that you do is that, you start by opening up and be, honest about things that you might not share with everybody, right? So you become vulnerable. So when you show vulnerability, that usually is providing the message that, hey, it's okay. I'm not perfect. I'm not here to judge you. We can talk to each other, right? We can have trust in each other. And that happens through many and many conversations, right? So having one-on-ones, getting the team together. We do something here we call the breakfast club. So we get together on a Friday and then we just talk and eat breakfast from home or dinner because we have engineers in the other side of the world as well, right? That
Nice.
might be eating dinner. And we just get together and then we talk, right? And then we talk about family, about life, about likes, dislikes. So just having that constantly and being open about yourself helps a lot with, trust building. So,
I like that.
and I would say I had something else. I think and it's starting with that trust mindset first, right? So when you hire these engineers, you hopefully you're putting them through a process that validates certain assumptions that you have, right, on the engineers. So trust their judgment. Start by making sure that you don't question the solutions that they bring, that you hire them because they're experts and that they know better. Even though you are an engineer, they probably know a lot more than you by now, especially if you've been doing management like I have for a while. So trust their judgment, right? Still, question things to get out of doubt, but don't question in a way that says to them, you don't know what you're doing, right? um, so if you want trust, you have to start by trusting others, even if you don't know them personally.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think that's key.
Yes.
I think it's a two-way street, and as a manager, I believe it's also part of the responsibility of engaging with that, sort of like opening the space for that to happen. I can give an example of how we do it at CodersLink. We have this thing called, and I really love it. It's one of the things that I enjoy the most of the week is it's called Question Wednesdays, and it's silly and it's just something very, very simple, but it's something to look forward to in terms of the week. And what we do is we pose a question, a personal question, every single Wednesday in our team chat, and we just have to respond to that. And it's questions that go from you know what's your favorite food, what do you prefer, tea or coffee. But the thing is, the simplicity of the questions turns into the conversation. So maybe you
Nice.
start understanding that someone likes Italian food, and then suddenly you realize that everyone in the team loves Italian food, and now you have a good place you can go whenever you meet each other. So I mean, it's
It's very
been
cool.
it's been fun. It's been fun doing that, and it's also sort of like what we do and what the fun things that we add to it, because it's not just, hey, here's the question, guys, but we also add like gifs of the price is right, and
Uh,
to make it fun. So whenever you were saying that, it sort of like struck my chord, and I thought it's some of the things that I enjoy, doing, and I think it helps the team decompress and also realize that it's while we're working, it's also about human relations and about having fun.
Exactly.
So I
Yes.
like that a lot. And have you managed teams in an office setting, or have you only managed teams on a remote basis?
I started in an office setting. I was not a manager at the time. Started as an engineer in an office setting, and then I was promoted to manager with the same team, and then I switched to remote. So it was sort of like a little bit in the office and then fully remote. So
And this question then might be a little bit, I don't know if it'll be difficult to answer, or maybe you won't have enough experience, if you will, for that. But how do you think there's a difference between managing, a team in an office setting versus remote?
difference between office setting versus remote. I think I mentioned something about value before.
Yeah.
So I would assume that that is the case, right? Having the presence doesn't really matter so much. As a manager, to be honest, I don't care when you do your work or where you do your work, or if you took a break to, walk your dog, or if you went for a haircut. None of that really matters anymore, right? So the whole presence and showing up early, has a lot less weight with me as a manager, now that I'm managing teams fully remote. So it's more about the value that you're adding, right? And how good you work with the team, right? So communication becomes very important. Written communication, I place a lot of value in that. Uh, Writing processes, writing ideas, writing action items, writing meeting notes. Everything has to be written down, because when you're remote, then time zones are a factor of life, and not everybody's going to be available at the same time as you. So being able to then go back and get that information asynchronously becomes very important, to managing teams. So
I agree.
yeah.
And how do you manage performance of your team?
As a team, I don't tend to measure individuals per se. I hold the team accountable. So I measure what the team is putting out, and we had lots of conversations about processes, because we work very hard in establishing trust within the team. Then we call each other out, right? So when someone is doing something that goes against what the team has agreed on, we're very, very okay with saying, hey, John, that's not how we do things here, and here's why, and here's the process, and send documentation over. And so that becomes, very, very easy to manage because you're just managing team output. Uh, but that doesn't mean that sometimes individuals, won't have problems, right? But yeah, the way I manage that is by first providing support, right? So the trust first. Don't assume that they're doing something wrong just for the sake of doing something wrong. Instead ask them, are you okay? What is going on? How can I help you? Do you need more support? Do you need more training? What do you need? How can I get you out of this, whatever it is that is happening in your life? And I'm here to help you. We're all here to help you as a team. You can count on our support, and then just let us know. I'm here to be, remove blockers, and whatever that blocker is, and it might be something, deeply personal, something family related, that maybe there is something we can do, right? Even if it's just give you a break, assign, different type of work, lesser expectations from you, just because you might not be available. You have kids going remote, for example, is something that a lot of parents on my team are dealing with right now. We're going back to school, and every school is starting remote first, and then they're going in person, but they might close, and you have to be remote again. And they're expecting kids to have an office setup and be there from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on some sort of office, and that is not going to be easy, right? So those things will show up on an individual level, because if you don't have kids, then it doesn't really affect you that much. So those are the things that you have to go on and see how you can support them.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's sort of like diagnosing, on an ad hoc basis and on an individual basis to be able to provide that support, you were saying, and remove those blockers. So
Yes.
I can definitely agree that that's very important in remote teams, and that's very important in general teams as well, to understand that that personal side of things. Um,
Exactly.
I mean, however, do you use any specific, KPIs for your team, or do you only measure output? So releases, or I don't know, versioning, or cut pushes, or do you have any specific KPIs for your team, or you're just generally?
For us specifically, it's more of a general thing. We do measure story points. We use those mainly for estimating, but we do keep track of how much output we produce as a team. Um, but it's usually about are we providing value to our customers, right? And what does that mean, right? So then it's working very closely with product and working very closely with sales and other executives to make sure that the work that's coming into our Kanban board is actually what we should be working on, right? So, and when you think about it that way, yes, you can have goals, you can have KPIs, but those become less important than are you working on the right things? We could push a lot of the wrong things, right? We could do a lot of work as an engineering team, but is it work that is adding value to your company? Is the question that we're always asking ourselves. So that prioritizing exercise becomes very important to us. Um, and that is not really something that you can put a number to, like, did you prioritize the right things? Unless you're measuring actual dollar values, right? Some projects might have a return on investment. Those are things that you can measure. And when you can, yes, we do measure those. But not everything is like that, right? So NPS scores is another one, right? So our goal is to have a better user experience that should be shown in a better NPS score. So yes, but it's very case by case specific depending on what the business needs, right? And the business needs are constantly changing, and we have to be able to then set ourselves up to be able to allow for that change, right? Change direction very quickly is something that we measure as a team. That with Scrum, for example, you're stuck on those 2 week cycles, right? Can we do even better than that? Yes, use Kanban, right? You just add the new work, right? So um, yes, always constantly changing our processes, always with the mindset of, are we providing value to the company?
You mentioned something very interesting, the prioritizing of tasks and the prioritizing of work that is smart work, and that's not just work for work. And I think that's very important. And you also mentioned that you focus on work that delivers real value. May that be a better user experience or a better revenue, more revenue or better revenue. Are there other factors that you take into account when making those prioritizing or triaging decisions on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, so we actually have what we call a priority matrix. So there are certain things that as a company we care about, right? So revenue being one, you care about the user experience being another one, and we have ways to measure those. Let's say, for example, as a company, we use what is called widely important goals. So then what is the widely important goal for the year, right? We all should be aligned to that goal. And then we measure those, right? So if a project comes in, an idea comes in, and then we say, hey, is this helping us achieve our widely important goal? Yes or no? It's going to make us any more money? Yes or no, right? So you have to have those conversations though before you come up with that list of things that is like commonalities that every group cares about. And then there are certain things that as engineers we care a lot about performance and security, right? And maintenance. And then sales cares a lot about new features, right? So that's where the conflict comes, and that's where you basically need to have a conversation, right? So if it matches a lot of your core values and the core things that you look for as a company, then it's usually a go, and it's just a matter of saying, well, when do we put it in? Because we have all this work that we have already here. So that's how we usually go about prioritizing work.
That's awesome. You also mentioned earlier about, I'm switching a little gear here and going back into remote teams. You mentioned that you did breakfast Fridays. Those are pretty cool. But are there any other ways that you engage your team besides just the usual, 9 to 5 work? How else do you engage your team?
Yes, so we have one-on-ones, we have the breakfast club, we have meetups, or we had meetups, in-person meetups. Now we do virtual meetups. We have tech talks, right? So where engineers present on a technology. We have something called the AV Club. So it's similar to a tech talk, but everybody watches the same video and then you have discussions about the video. It's usually something technology related. I do send gift baskets to my team. I send gift cards. I also send just like online postcards to my team. You know, they get delivered via email. Other times they actually get printed out. So, you know, just different avenues to approach the team in a remote environment, right? That's something that doesn't require you to go to a place. Uh, but yes, once COVID is over, hopefully pretty soon, we'll plan on implementing meetups again, in-person meetups. Those are very, very valuable. Getting to know someone in person, shaking hands, giving
Yeah.
somebody a hug, having dinner together. Those, you know, trust building, you know, it's key. You know, some of the must-haves, right? Even if you're fully remote.
I agree. Definitely. And again, I'm gonna come back to the human factor. The human factor is very important, and being able to continuously remind ourselves as, you know, as team members that that's what it's all about. I think valuing that will helps people feel, you know, comfortable with who and with what they're working and where they're working, and as well as, you know, with how they're performing. I think it impacts how they perform as well. So I really like your practices, and, you know, congrats on those. I
Thanks.
really like those. And so moving a little bit deeper, you know, we went from remote work, now we went to general management. I want to go a layer deeper. I want to go into engineering management practices. You know,
Mhm.
tech team or a general team, two differend animals, right? You know, an engineering team, in my eyes, I mean, I have a little bit of background in tech. I used to program in PHP backend, a little bit of intermediate, but, you know, that's all I know. And I think that's sort of like the very, very edge case, an outlier, if you will.
Mhm.
But, you know, are there any specific processes or frameworks that you use to manage your engineering team? You know, agile. I think you mentioned Kanban, for example.
Exactly. Yeah. So agile being, you know, more like a mindset um, that you want to be able to deliver value incrementally, constantly. And then Kanban being one of the things that enables you to do that. So the reason I use Kanban is simplicity. I mentioned simplicity before. Kanban is very simple. It's very easy to understand. It's a lot less ceremonies than, you know, compared to other agile frameworks like Scrum. Scrum being the most famous one. Um, so yeah, that,
Do you have you tried, you know, besides Scrum, besides Kanban, have you tried other frameworks that you said, okay, I've tried this, but this doesn't work at all, and I prefer to go back to these that I'm comfortable with?
So I've done Scrum, Kanban, and just the classic waterfall type projects where you do everything ahead of time. So you have requirements gathering and you spend a lot of time doing that. And you pass that on to the engineers and the designers. Designers create something and they pass that on to the engineers. Then we code it and pass that on to QA. And it's like a lot of big chunks of work being passed around. And that used to be pretty common. So that's the way that we did things back when I was at that consultancy that I mentioned. So basically done, you know, went from that to Scrum and then to Kanban. And then I really like Kanban, I'll be honest. So so far it's very simple, very easy. And, you know, it's just having less ceremonies to worry about, you know, makes the work so much simpler.
I like it. Yeah, I agree. Like keeping with I think the theme of the whole chat that we're having today is going to be simplicity. You
Yes.
know, keeping it simple. I like it. And, you know, digging just one step deeper, do you have any weekly practices that you follow in terms of engineering? Do you have like daily stand-ups, weekly stand-ups? Do you have code reviews on Wednesdays? Do you have any particular weekly practices that you follow with your team?
Not a lot of weekly practice. We have retrospectives once a month because we do want to see if our processes, if there's anything we should improve, right? Normally we have themes for the month on things that we care about as far as the process goes. So there is that, and then we have stand-ups Monday and Wednesday only, and every other day is just basically you fill out a spreadsheet with what you're planning on doing for the day, what you did yesterday, and if you have any blockers. And then I go on the spreadsheet and then figure out if I need to unblock anyone. The reason I do this again is remote teams being distributed across the U.S., across the world, and I want to give time back. There's something I don't think I've mentioned before, but as engineers, there's something called being in the flow, where just basically having enough time to concentrate on something. So I take time management very serious, and I want to make sure my engineers have time to concentrate and be able to do a lot of the thinking and the research that they need to do to be able to do their work. So while sometimes these meetings might help me more than them. So then I'm very mindful of those. And then, we always question, do we really need this meeting? Do we need to stand up? Can we do something different? And that's how we find a balance. So we still do it twice a week, mainly because the trust is there. You get to see, your teammates, but, you also then get Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings. You don't have to deal about that half an hour to 45 minutes, right, of just telling everybody else what you did and what you're going to be working on. When you could just write that down at some point in the day, and then actually, own your time and be able to concentrate on the things that you need to concentrate on. So.
That's awesome. Time management, huge topic, and it's definitely very important in today's busy world. And 6 second of concentration, time frames that
Yes.
we have. Are there any other tips or best practices that you follow for to enable your team to be better at their own time management?
Yeah, so we use calendar tools that just basically help you manage your time. Pomodoro is a thing that I preach to the team. I don't force them to use Pomodoro technique, but I preach it a lot to them because I use it personally. And then just being mindful of meetings. And I ask the team to question every single meeting. If a meeting, gets scheduled to them and it has no agenda, they're okay to just decline the meeting and ask for an agenda. Sometimes, a meeting could just be an email or a Google Doc that you work on asynchronously. So anytime I feel like setting up a meeting because I need to have a conversation, that is, I need that I question, and then I say, well, maybe I'll start with the Google Doc. We'll do the asynchronous communication first. And only if we feel like, we need further discussion, then we'll set up a meeting. And then, try to not do hour long meetings. That's another thing that we do here a lot. So we try to keep them at 30 minutes, 45 minutes the most. And then block your calendar, right? Because the way a lot of companies work is, they'll look at your calendar, they'll see that you're free, they'll schedule something right for you, whether it's an interview or they have a question or they want to get your opinion on something, so they'll schedule a meeting. So if you know how the game is played, so then block your calendar so that you have time for yourself and be able to manage that.
I like that. That's one of the practices I learned early in my career that I use actively and just aggressively. I constantly every
Yes.
single day I come to my calendar. Well, every single week on my calendar, and I start blocking. Here's when I want to do deep work. Like I don't want to get disturbed. Now, schedule 2-3 hours for that, and
Mhm.
it helps my team understand what I'm working on. It helps my team know when they can talk to me. So I definitely agree with that, and I think it's of great value not only for yourself but for your team as well because it gains them visibility. And the more visibility, in my opinion, the better, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, going into more, some other practices, and given that we're in the engineering management topic, are there any code-based management practices you recommend?
Code-based management practices. Yeah, so there is a whole thing to be said about shifting left. And what that means is that the more that you can validate and the more things you can do before you actually merge code into your main branch, then the better you are. And so some examples are static analyzers, running your unit tests against your branch, running your functional tests, your end-to-end tests even. So being able to deploy your branch into some environment that has everything and then running tests against that, doing your load testing in there, your performance testing, your security checks, your secret checks, right? All those things, the earlier they happen in the process, the better you're going to be, right? So the least likely you are to introduce problems, the faster things go. And with that theme of providing value to our users constantly, and keeping quality up, so the more you ship left, the better you are. So tools specifically for that, I would say use what works best for you, what you're familiar with. If you're not familiar with any, then do a little bit of research and usually go with what most people know, because then you get better support. And as a manager, I'm always thinking about hiring. So then the more familiarity there is with tools in the industry, the more likelihood that you're going to get engineers that have experience in those tools.
Got it. So I think that a lot of what you mentioned is key for for teams to be able, again, and I don't want to sound like Facebook, but move fast and break things. But I mean, it is true. It helps them to be autonomous and to continue to deliver that value. So I'm curious, are there anyone that's in charge or responsible for assuring that they go through the process, or is everyone expected to do that as part of their involvement with the team?
Um, Everyone should be expected to at least know how things happen and how things work, and be able to help out if needed. Obviously, you're going to have experts, right? So you have front-end engineers, QA, back-end engineers, your DBA administrators, your security experts, right? Um, Ideally, what you want, is you want a team that is able to combine all those roles into one. And if you don't have those roles, then it usually falls on the engineers to know about security and know about QA, and they should be able to write tests. If you have QA, QA sometimes can help write some code, validate things, run their tests, write unit tests. That usually falls on the engineers. So it's a little mix. I think because, at least in my experience, I push for teams adding value. So then I expect everybody in the team to be able to contribute in one way or another. With Agile, one of the tenets there is that you want to avoid, that switch over, me passing work over the wall to somebody else, because that causes a lot of friction. There's a lot of time wasted in there. There are blockers that happen. So for that to happen, you basically need a team that is able to do a lot, right? And everybody in the team is able to do a lot, right? So the circle of experience spreads a little bit over to. It's not just a software engineer for the backend. So software engineer for the backend, that it's okay going into the front end and debugging something. It's okay writing a unit test, right? So yeah, I would say more on the generalist side works a lot better.
That's pretty cool. Do you Is that something that you source for when you're looking for engineers, or is it more something that you teach them whenever they join your team?
Both. So when you're looking, there's this thing in the industry. I think it came from McKinsey or some large consulting company. It's called the T shape, right? So
Yeah.
you want somebody that knows a lot of things, but they specialize in one. So that's the sort of talent that most teams would desire for. We want a backend engineer that can do all these sort of things. We want a front-end engineer that is okay, going into the backend, that is okay writing SQL statements, that is okay writing unit tests, right? So yeah, T-shaped engineers is something very common that we look for in our teams. Yes.
I agree. And I think in every team, besides tech, should do that. We don't. I guess it's not very well practiced, but it should be.
Yes.
Anyways, you mentioned some tools that you used before, and do you have any other specific software tools that you use to enable your team?
I like being able to provide them with tools and then having them choose when to use them. So I like, we are a .NET shop. So there's a tool called ReSharper that just has a lot of things that they provide you with. So ReSharper is a tool that we provide, the team that helps them, on their local environment. It does a lot of security checks for you, static analyzers. It has a lot of best practices embedded in there. So we'll make recommendations. If you write a for loop, it will say this could be rewritten this way because it's more performant, it's more secure. Um, so it has a lot of things embedded in there, but I also have to trust my engineers. And when they tell me that, hey, they're okay, they like ReSharper, but it's not their thing, then I have to trust their judgment that that is not, something that I'm going to force them to use. So as long as I'm able to provide them with the tools that they need, I think they'll be fine. We obviously use source control, we use GitHub for that, and we have a lot of plugins to GitHub to do all these other checks, right? We use deployment tools to be able to push our code into AWS. Um, so let's see, what tools do we use specifically? There, Octopus Deploy, we use TeamCity is another one where we basically build our code in TeamCity and we deploy it using Octopus Deploy. Um, Ansible for management configuration. We're looking at other tooling, to do feature flags, for example. It's something that we built in house, and now we want to use a tooling, to have better support. So, yes, tools are great enablers, but there is also a thing about using the right tool for the job, right? So,
Yeah, using the right tool for the job. I think that's like there was a joke about that. I think it's about using or wrong tool to open a door. I don't remember the joke, but yeah, I can relate to that. But it's true. I mean, if and especially in this software as a service world, right? There's just a tool for everything nowadays. So you can just basically employ and get and it's turnkey, right? So it's pretty good to get it's pretty good to know that there's that you have that flexibility in terms of like this is the recommended, this is the base, but feel free to do whatever you want if it delivers on the value. I like that you're very objective, very objective focused. That's pretty cool. um, let's say that for a second, let's talk about a scenario here. Let's say that I was a newly minted manager. Let's say you back in the day, whenever you were just promoted to a manager, then you were going remote, you had no idea what you were doing. What are some recommendations that you've learned from all of your experience managing engineering teams? What were your 2 to 3 things? uh, what two to three tips would you give that person?
sure. I would say start by listening. Listening is very, very important. The path to management is usually you become an expert in something, and then there's this, like why in your decision making in your life. Do you then want to manage people, or do you want to continue down, the very technical approach, right, or whatever it is that you're doing? And then, because you all normally have to make it to a certain level before you're even considered for management, and it's very normal for new managers to say, okay, I came here because I'm an expert in software engineering, for example. So then I need to then tell people how to do their work because I know better than them, and that's why they put me here. And that is totally wrong. Your job is not to do that anymore. You have engineers doing the engineering work. Your job is to enable them to do that. And that requires a lot of listening. So less talking, more listening. Uh, think of teams, so how do you build trust within the team? Think of time management. As a manager, a big part of your job is decision making and communication. So your calendar looks full of meetings, and that's totally okay for you as a manager. That is not okay for your engineers. So we tend to impose our needs on our team, and then so it becomes very easy to then speak in meetings, right? So I need a meeting for this, I need a meeting for that. If I need a decision, then you just throw a meeting on the calendar. What you're not realizing is that you're screwing with their time, you're screwing with their flow, you're screwing with their ability to think. You're forcing them to switch context, right, from one thing to the other very quickly. And why that might work for you, that does not work for them. Um, so communication being another very important one. Write your things down. If you can start a blog, that would be a great idea, because there's a lot of things that you learn and then you forget, or maybe I'm forgetful, but I do forget a lot of things. So writing them down somewhere, keeping a notebook of ideas and processes and why things work and when things didn't work is very important. And lastly, I would say lead by questions. This is very important. You might know the answer, you think you're right, don't say that thing out loud. Ask questions instead, right? Because again, your engineers are the experts now. They're the ones that are going to do the work. They're the ones architecting the systems and building them for you. If you have concerns, it's okay to have concerns. Ask about those concerns. Don't tell them, don't do it like that, because all you're doing is basically getting your engineers to become defensive, not to trust you anymore. They're not going to come with you with any ideas or concerns, because they're going to feel like you're just going to shut them down because you think you know better than them. So you're not doing anybody any favors by imposing your knowledge. It's okay, you were an expert, you got there. Just ask a lot of questions instead.
It's you got there, now you're no longer there. It's a different sort of like focus that you have.
It's very, very different. Yes.
Those are awesome recommendations. I think those are very well for I think for the general manager as well. So thank you for those. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about hiring. Um, I know that hiring remote is completely different animal and beast than just hiring for an in-person position. Given that you've worked in remote for so long, what's the key for hiring in your eyes a remote developer? What do you focus on?
Uh, Remote, I would say I mean, it's not that much different from hiring, in person, but you are missing out on some things. I'll give you an example. When you go for an interview in a physical place, people look at how you're dressed, right? Like right now, I could be wearing shorts and sandals, and you wouldn't know. You're just looking at my
That's right.
shirt, right? There is a smell to me. There is my height, my presence, right? The aura that I provide. All those things are part of how you communicate. And so normally you do this, and you start looking good, right? Superwoman pose, and it gives you confidence. And all that shows, right, are his hands sweaty. And then when you're interviewing someone, all that communication comes across. And when you're doing an interview remotely, you lose all of that, right? So you're losing on a lot of the communication things that you would normally rely on to make a decision, right? Decisions, sadly, are still based on opinions for the most part, right? It's very difficult to make decisions about an engineer without saying, I feel good about this person, right? If you don't feel good about them, you usually don't hire them, right? They could be perfect elsewhere, but you still have to feel good. So a lot of that feel good about someone comes from those in-person interactions. So then what you have to do is you then try to get as much of that communication to happen. So video is very important, right? Being able to see someone becomes very important, but you also want to be fair. So keep your process consistent. So treat every candidate the same, right? Put them through the same process. Don't change things for one or the other. Um, and then, it's consistency and visibility, I would say, are two of the important ones. Another thing that you missed out on, and this is, happens a lot in the tech world, your whiteboarding sessions, right?
Yeah.
Um, those are sort of different now because, you don't have a whiteboard normally, or nothing that is as close to a whiteboard. So then normally it's like go find tooling that works for everybody. Um, Usually what we do here Olo is we allow you to bring your machine, and then you log in and you log into your IDE of choice, right? The tools that you're used to, and then we accommodate to what you work on normally, right? So being very accommodating to those things, and being okay, remote, being okay with kids showing up, right, is another thing that has happened in interviews. Being okay with people in the background, with noises, right? Everybody's at home now, so all the office rule settings sort of like go away, and you're going to be working with them, and it's going to be the exact same thing. So don't punish people for little things in interviews that you would normally punish them for in an on-site interview. So just just keep that remote mindset in mind when you're interviewing.
Definitely. I think that's big, and that's part of what helps. It also brings it takes some of the body language away, but it also gives you more. Going back to the meritocracy, it also helps those who don't perform well on those things to be able to actually shine on what they do, which is their
Yes.
work. So I think it's a little bit of a balance. It balances out both sides. So it's part of the, like I like to say, it's part of the whole equation.
Yes.
Do you look for in any specific traits or skills in your engineers when you're hiring, or do you only know, or do you follow very strictly your job description?
Our job descriptions right now are actually varied because we're hiring for all sorts of positions, right? So, and from junior level to senior level. So what we do, or what I do, is I look for a core set of traits that I like to see. So humility being one, communication being very important. I need to make sure that we're going to communicate well, um, or else it's going to be very difficult to work remotely if you can write well and speak well. So communication. I I look for teamwork. So I ask a lot of questions about how you would work with a team, give you scenario type questions about, possibilities, getting feedback, providing feedback, and how does that work. Um, and then, a good technical base, and obviously commensurate with experience, right? So if you are a recent graduate from a bootcamp or a university, obviously that good technical base might just mean you're able to do an MVC application and you know what SQL means, right? And I'm not going to push your limits into all the stuff, but if you're applying for a staff engineer position, we expect you to have worked with distributed systems and to know distributed tracing and to know how to deploy and set up CI/CD, and we expect you to architect systems, right? So that technical base will vary, but all these other things are pretty standard, right? Specifically communication being a very important one.
I like that. I like that. And I know you also mentioned that you work with teams around the world, which leads me to assume that you've worked with with international talent.
Correct.
What are your general thoughts about international talent? What have been your experiences? Are there any differences with US developers? What can you tell me about that?
There is differences in culture that I've noticed when working with engineers in Asia and Europe, and with engineers in Latin America. So I work with engineers in Mexico, Guatemala, Canada, India, Japan, Ukraine, Poland, all over the place.
You have everything.
Yes. So I would say the one thing as a manager is do not assume that people elsewhere work like they work in the US,
Okay.
right? So because it's not like that, right? So um, culture in other countries will vary. So you will do yourself a favor if you hire an engineer in Mexico to go read about, the culture in Mexico, go read about the culture in India. Um, even colors and the way you approach, and even eye contact, normally, which is very common here in the US, That's something that is not common in other countries, right? So it's okay for people to look down when they're talking to you, and so don't take that the wrong way. So the more you learn about those little differences, in especially in communication when you're remote, I think